Hello, this is Mota from ACG, and it's an honor to be participating for this event. Unfortunately, we're not live, and that's okay because we have to adapt. Now we have this new work at home strategy, and it's a hybrid environment. And thank God for networking and telecom, because just think where we would be if we weren't connected. I mean, you think of the number of people and jobs that were saved, and a lot of people outside of our industry really didn't know the importance of telecom until the pandemic hit. And we have to adapt from that area, because I don't know how long we're going to stay in this area. But there's some good things going on in some emerging technology. But part of my discussion is related to that. Anytime we look at the evolution of technology, whether it's IT or wide area network in the different areas, people are willing to pay for better experience. People are willing to pay for simplification. And in those areas, when service providers and vendors identify simplification, customer experience, and the impact on that, it creates tremendous opportunities for new revenue and new expanded TAM in that area. So part of this area where I'm going to talk about is related to this whole evolution of networking. And now we're hearing some terms related to cloud networking, network as a service. And honestly, it's pretty exciting, and I'm honored to be part of this event. And hopefully you can send any questions from that area. And for myself, ACG is an analyst and consulting company that primarily focuses on the service provider space. We cover everything from market share, developing TAMs for vendors, for Wall Street, and for a lot of the service providers. But we also work with a lot of the service providers, developing some architectural roadmap, some frameworks, but also we have a part of our business where we do a lot of business analysis, business case, and TCOs. And this is an area regarding network as a service and managed service, or moving to becoming an MSP, where we develop a lot of business models for that area. So let me share the presentation here for the audience. And I'll put it in slide mode here, and hopefully you can see this all okay. So the whole theme of it is related to the history of simplification. I think when we start with this, it's important to understand that we don't want to just do technology for technology's sake. Technology, there has to be an economic benefit. And anytime you have a feature and talk about a feature, if you can map it to economic value, then it's just technology for technology's sake. But from a microclimate point of view, we saw that 2020 was a challenge. And this is from a global point of view, where global GDP was down about 3.5%. And in some areas, we saw that technology, we saw new companies related to conference call. I think I've become an expert in Zoom, WebEx, Google Meet, all these different areas. And I think we've all adapted where we have the drivers and application for that. But that kind of allowed us to continue business continuity, but it also changed the workforce, right? A lot of enterprises and just big companies realize that we have to continue our business, and they had to get a lot of remote workers, work from home, and still maintain security, still maintain compliancy, but still maintain reliability and access to these applications so that they could be enterprise grade. So all of a sudden, instead of having 50 branch offices, certain enterprise moved to what we call 1,000 or a few thousand enterprise office, because a lot of these work from home employees became kind of like remote office, where they needed the same level of security and umbrella of connectivity and reliability, so that it was agnostic of location, agnostic of device, right? So emerging challenges. But the good thing is that if we look at 2021 and 2022, GDP is expected to finish at about 5.5% globally, and then also to increase at 4.2% globally. So that creates a lot of opportunities for discretionary income, some spending, where we see CapEx projected to be increasing for the next 2 years in wireless, not only wireless, and also in wireline, right? But while all this is going on, we see that there's still some challenges. Service providers are spending a lot of money in certain areas and they're unsure of the business case. If we look at 5G, where we see the consumer 5G, a lot of service providers are doing it just to maintain their customer base because they spent so much money to acquire that customer. You know, customer attrition is a big point of view, right? So they have to look at other areas where there's private 5G and other areas and flexibility to not only optimize the cost of delivering the service, but also creating new revenue opportunities in the area. But we also see that networks are becoming somewhat more distributed, more virtualized, and there's a level of flexibility that these enterprises want, and they want to be able to consume the information and the services that you offer in more of a flexible model than in the past. And the key is that these enterprises are moving fast. And if you don't move at a pace where they move, you're going to compromise some opportunities there regarding profitability in the area, or they're just going to do it themselves. So good things and interesting thing, but it's important to understand that if we look at some of the biggest challenges that we see with CIOs and CTOs is this whole challenge of understanding how do I address some of my markets, right? So if we look at the biggest CIO and CTO challenge is an interesting area because I was a former CTO myself working in Wall Street, and my CEO would come in and says, hey, I need a budget. And I need a budget, and I need for you to identify and give me a budget to say, you know, tell me how much IT capacity we need. So I would make a map of capacity, compute, and storage, what we needed. And then I would make a prediction on how much CapEx budget I need, how much OpEx I need from that area. And to be honest, it was always a guesswork I had to figure out. And then usually what happened if you had a traditional CEO, as they're walking out the door, they would say, oh, and by the way, we're reducing your IT budget by X%, right? So it was a difficult task for CIOs and CTO to address this constant challenge because it was difficult for us to predict the future, right? And what we see is that we usually made a demand prediction for our IT requirement, but there were some big concerns when you did that, right? Because if you look at the reality at the end of the year, the actual demand that was for that area, you're somewhat off there, right? It was difficult because if you were able to get it predicted exactly the same, maybe you should be in a different business working in Vegas or Macau for that area. But there's some interesting things with that is that you see that if you over provision the network, some people call it killing a fly with a sledgehammer, there was an opportunity cost, right? And that was tremendous where the CFO would yell at you because you're just spending unused capacity in the area. And especially in wide area networks where you just had if it got close to 50%, you automatically provision another network. So tremendous opportunity cost that was lost, right? But then what was worse is that if you under provision the network, that means you couldn't deliver the services to your customer. And that's where you lose customers or lose your job. And that was the concerns with CIOs and CTOs were the longevity of their job. So it was a difficult situation. And it wasn't until something like cloud came into play that you were able to kind of have an area, right, that you could enable and map it to your demand based on infrastructure as a service and address the capacity needs. So a major problem was solved with that piece, right? So when we look at the evolution of cloud, and it might be trivial for some of the people, but from others, I think it's important because we've got some young groups. And when I usually mention T1, E1s or X25, or they give me the deer in the headlights look. But if we look at the evolution moving from circuit-based technology where you had all these multiplexers, and for every connection, it had to be an N+1 branch to office. So you had a tremendous amount of mesh network, and whether they were T1s, E1s for that area, you had low speed, low capacity, but a tremendous amount of complexity in the area. And when frame relay and ATM came out, it solved the big issue. And again, the theme of this discussion is simplification. People pay for simplification. Is that now you are able to have one connection coming out of each branch instead of an N+1 connection. And you can still have a fully meshed network, but now it's in the cloud or in the frame relay or ATM network. And those were different technologies from that area. But you also had higher speeds, but with this mesh network, there was a tremendous amount of savings and simplified ways to manage your IT and to manage your wide area network when we moved to a frame relay ATM cell-based infrastructure. And then from that, we moved to an MPLS network. And again, what it did is it simplified the network. It created this scalable IP environment, but IPVPNs became secure, right? And then we have what we call this packet-based infrastructure. But when we look at from a managed services point of view, even today, MPLS is still a $32 billion market. We see things in SD-WAN where we see about a $2 billion market, in some cases a little bit higher. So MPLS is not going away anytime soon from that area. But regardless of it, the point is that MPLS solved an issue for scalability and simplification in the wide area network. So you get the message with this evolution going on. But then what happens from that area is that some other interesting things started going. This virtualized infrastructure, I remember hearing about it. People thought that, yeah, we were doing virtualized in the servers environment where we were able to take a server and put multiple applications. It was that aha moment. But then what people started doing is capacity compute and storage could be in the cloud, infrastructure as a service, right? And different things associated storage as a service. And initially people were skeptical, but they saw the capability where if you were the innovation that it had, if you were a startup, to start a startup that you have some requirements, technology and application, it would be so complex and so expensive because you had to provision a server. That could take a few weeks. That could be $10,000 to $30,000, or in some cases more, to provision the server, create all the applications and do that, where when virtualized infrastructure came into play, it allowed us, let's say as a startup, to go to Amazon or go somewhere and be able to just point and click and be able to create these services. You needed a server. Well, before it was very complex. You had to wait for IP. You can decide whether you want Linux or Windows, the amount of storage, the type of CPU you want. And it literally created a level of startup that was at an astronomical rate. So it had a major impact because what? We moved to a simplification on how we provision servers, right? And then when people noticed that, to say, well, if we could virtualize some of the infrastructure, why can't we move some of our applications there as well? And then what started happening is as people moved applications to the cloud, they realized like we can build these applications on the cloud. Again, it created much simpler simplification for IT. They could do things much faster, but the cost effectiveness of having these virtualized application was just tremendous. So again, now there were some IT challenges where if IT wasn't moving fast enough and you were a line of business manager, you use a credit card transaction. So there was a shadow IT, but some of these line of business managers says, I didn't care, I needed to move. So the next evolution is multi-cloud, is that you see is kind of what we call this virtualized intelligent infrastructure, where a lot of the complexity is moved to the cloud. So we think things of AI, machine learning, some of those algorithms have been around for 30 plus years, but you didn't see the level of innovation going into a lot of the enterprise because it required multiple PhDs to understand those algorithms and to implement it. Where now you can have here in Arizona, we have a 13-year-old that developed a phone application, and all it was is just a skin that they created of what the input parameters are, but then all the complexity goes to the cloud where there is a machine learning algorithm, and it can create, I think this case was like, they can point at a flower and it can tell you the type of flower, the condition it was in, and do that. So we're seeing this with enterprise, this level of intelligence accelerating with companies like Google Cloud and others, kind of moving the complexity away from the IT and creating this level of innovation, right? So this story all leads to something, right? And it leads to the point of moving to what we call, there's some growth opportunities associated with this whole area of transitioning to simplification. We talked about the cloud, right? But what's happening is these applications that traditionally run in the data center, there was some level of security in the data center where it was firewall, intrusion detection, IPS. But in the cloud, it was kind of like a public cloud that was disjointed, right? And what we see from this area is that in the application side, right, is that as we talked about network as a service or cloud networking, is that traditionally these applications that run in a cloud, right, created a level of complexity where that you want to interconnect your IT and your HP office. It was complex. You had this thing, what we call cloud on a stick, where you had one stick for each particular cloud. You created VRFs and MPLS, and it was complicated to do. And now we're moving to this area what we call network as a service or cloud networking, which provides the ability to build networks that can change the pace of how these applications connect. So now, because there's this movement where over 97% applications that are developed are kind of developed cloud-centric, and I'm actually surprised that number is not higher. But with companies like Packet Fabric on the network as a service and companies like Alkira for cloud networking, they're addressing this big need of literally the next evolution of simplification in the wide area network. Right. And the key is it provides not only simplification on this multi-cloud environment, it gives you best visibility and control, but it allows the enterprises to take advantage of building these hybrid multi-cloud network. Right. So it's important to understand that we looked at infrastructure applications, and now is networking services that are being moved in there, which is a logical step, right? So when I talked about the biggest challenges for CIO and CTO about this whole adaptive on-demand capability for capacity, compute, and storage, now you can move networking and cloud and multi-cloud into that challenge so that CIOs and CTOs could address that piece. And from an enterprise point of view, from a survey, is that 96% says, yes, we're going to run multi-cloud, whether it's Salesforce automation or CRM application for this, or some other application related to accounting in the area from that piece. So the need for this agile networking and enterprise IT service providers need to figure out whether they partner, whether they build their own, because these enterprises are going to require, because they need that next level of simplification, next level of automation, next level of control. So from a market opportunity, when we look at it from a market size, this is interesting because right now, ACG is projecting it to be network as a service, about a $57 billion managed services market. That number could be higher when you look at the DIY, but the key is that when you own this platform and network as a service on top of your existing service, you're able to offer things like storage as a service, and then you're able to have this platform to partner up where there's firewall companies and other areas to develop this marketplace of applications that could fit into this umbrella of security, simplification, onboarding, kind of like what the iPhone did where you have these multiple applications, or what SD-WAN did with some of these areas. So tremendous opportunities, and service providers need to understand what insertion point and whether they want to partner with someone that's developing this and white label or something like that, or actually consider building their own service from that piece and partner up with some vendors that could help them get to market much quicker. So tremendous market, and there's a race in this area. And what we've seen is the service providers that develop this early, the customer acquisition cost tends to be a little bit lower, and the lifetime value of the customer tends to be longer from that area. So tremendous opportunities. But for the enterprise listening in the group, this is really not as much of a threat to your IT group. This is more of an opportunity to your IT group that literally initially kind of was resistant on cloud, but they've learned to embrace cloud, and it created a level of expertise that was needed to manage this cloud networking environment, multi-cloud, and now add network as a service as a way to alleviate some of these IT to focus on more business priorities associated with how IT could help the business move and be more innovative and create a level of innovation that IT can help these enterprises move even at a much faster pace. Don't let the network be a hindrance. It should be that the network should be agnostic of the services that the enterprise wants to deliver. And when we look at it from a point of view, from a summary thing, is that the key word to all of this, and you can read here, it's related to simplification sells. Customer service sells. And if you do it right, you're able to increase things like time to revenue, have a flexibility on pricing, have reduced OpEx, increase margin if you're doing that, but you're able to literally create an environment, right, where you're just going to the next step of the evolution of simplifying in the network. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you. Unfortunately, this wasn't live from that point of view, but I think it's an honor. I feel it's an honor to be participating in the Layer 1, 2, 3 event, and hopefully we can participate more. So this is Ray Mota, and I'd like to thank you again.